when you cut beef, you don't get fluid out all over the place. Fluid is in the, there's no free-flowing fluid. So how do we get fluid from the capillaries into the fascia? And that's part of the osmosis, of the osmotic pressure. There are two ways to get fluid from, I've already started, haven't I? Two ways to get,
Do your thing.
2 ways to get fluid into the fascia. And one way is thresher, and then John Sharkey doesn't like to use the word shear. He said because there's a resistance to shear. I think it's pressure and glide is what he would say. There's no sliding, but it's glide. The tissue just moves with you. And when that, somebody at the door. When that happens, and then, hi Trace, and then we take our hands up, there's been a negative pressure from the pressure and the glide, and then we pull our hands up and positive pressure pulls the fluid out of the tissue. So that's the power in the hydration part of what we do with Barnes myofascial release. Can you figure out how the other way is that we get fluid into our muscles and fascia?
Like water baking?
Drinking
water. Drinking water?
No.
No?
Where does drinking water go? The digestive system, your intestines. It's absorbed into the capillaries. All water goes into capillaries and blood vessels.
Breathing.
Breathing, no. Breathing, yes. Movement. Because again, this pressure differential, the pressure differential that happens when we're moving over and over again, and moving in diagonal patterns and moving all over, what happens is there's a pressure gradient is produced and the fluid comes out into the tissue. And so that's the only, movement and pressure and glide are the only ways that we can get fluid into the fascia. You can drink and drink and drink and drink or drink. John says this all the time. But if your fascia is restricted, it's like pouring water on a stone. You have to be able to get the fluid from the capillaries that you've drunk into the fascia. Pressure and glide and movement. That's the only thing that does it. So that's why Craig is so good about, and I think we all are very good here, about, yes, do myofascial release, but when you're finished, move. Do those pelvic tubes, do those breaths, do those cat-cows, do those thoracic rotations. Get movement going in the muscles that you've actually released. The fascia that you've actually released. But you know, there is no such thing as a muscle. There is no such thing. It's the myofascial unit. Because what we haven't understood until recently is that this whole continuous web of cells, 35 to 75 to 100 trillion cells, is just a bunch of cells. And there are different cells. There are cardiac cells, and there are stomach cells, and there are liver cells, and there are spleen cells. But what forms the organ of the heart? What forms the organ of the lungs? What forms the organ of the stomach? It's the parenchyma of the fascia that pulls the organ together. And let's take the heart, for example. The heart, when you make one cut here and open it up, and then one cut here and open it up, it opens up into a spiral. And you can see the whole heart in your hands in one long piece of tissue, meat. And you close it up, and there are the ventricles and the atria and the ventricles. And you open it up and you close it up. So John Sharkey says we used to think that the fluid was pushed into the atrium, went through the valves, and then the heart squeezed the fluid out. He said that's only partly true. What happens is because the heart is a spiral, and because the fascia is working with the muscle, what happens is there's a squeezing, a push, and a spiraling of the fluid inside to get it out into the vessels. The liver is nothing but a bunch of liver cells pulled together by the parenchyma of the fascia. Fascia pulls it together. You can't separate liver from fascia because the fascia is holding it into its shape. Isn't that marvelous to think about?
Yeah.
Just marvelous. So we're doing all these dissections and we're seeing this opening up of the spiral of the heart. We're seeing a tongue laid out on the table, a tongue, esophagus, all the way down to the stomach, and then the diaphragm. The heart, the stomach, and the diaphragm, all one continuous fascial line, right there on the table. And what Joanne likes to do is, Joanne Avison, she likes to pull on the tongue and watch the heart move.
Oh, yeah.
You're always speaking from your heart.
Yeah.
But think about the stomach too. And then the vagus nerve, that wonderful wandering nerve. Did anybody think about the vagus when I was just saying that? Of course. The vagus nerve coming down through this horizontal fascial plane, the thoracic inlet, the jugular artery, the carotid vein, and the vagal nerve. And the vagus isn't really a nerve, it's a plexus. It's a whole plexus. It comes off it's one of the cranial nerves. It comes off, it comes down. It immediately innervates the lungs, the heart, the diaphragm, the stomach, and goes down into the intestines and innervates down here. So it's a whole, if you see it dissected out, it's a whole plexus. It's like a tree. And you can't, and so now what they're really realizing is the vagus nerve has an awful lot to do with everything working in balance, sympathetic, parasympathetic, working in balance. And so one of the things they found out, the somatic body therapists have found this out, that if you breathe in and hold it, and then breathe out, apparently that low vibrates the vagus nerve and calms everything down. So if you're in an agitated state, or if you can't sleep, if you're finding yourself, I get up at about 3 o'clock in the morning now, thinking about everything I have to do, and where am I going to box this, and those files have to come with me on the plane, and I can't, and I need to clean out the car before they put it on the truck, and all these things at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's nothing to stop you. I have to get up and go to the bathroom and walk around and say, come on, go back to sleep. But for a while, I had some bronchitis for a while, and I was getting breathless. And I felt like I couldn't get my breath. And that is such a frightening feeling.
Yeah.
So I said, whoa, in the middle of the night. I'm glad I don't live with anybody. The kitties wouldn't have minded. Whoa. And it starts to calm you down. And it's really quite interesting to see how everything is connected and everything is responsive to what you're thinking.